All right, gentlemen, one last question for each of you before I bring Yolande back into the conversation, and I imagine there are some questions from the audience as well. So Guy, I'll start with you. Let's imagine that Biden is confirmed. Tell us about his first 100 days, and if you were advising the Prime Minister right now of Canada, what would you tell him? And Jonathan, fair warning, I'm going to give you the same question, except we're going to imagine Trump is reelected, okay?
Well, obviously the priority for Joe Biden in the transition period is to choose the people for key positions. You may know that when you have a change in administration in Washington, there are about 3,000 senior positions that have to be filled. Some 600, 700 that have to be confirmed by the Senate. So that will be the first task. And I suspect that we will see a number of familiar faces there. I'm sure that the embassy is looking at all of this. We have entries in both camps, and the embassy will want to report to Ottawa what they hear, who might be assigned to which secretary position, what we know about these persons, their past position on Canada, their linkages. So all this will be very important. One thing also that if I were the Prime Minister, once Joe Biden is confirmed, I would issue an official invitation to come to Canada. In fact, we have always done that. When I was in Washington, let me tell you that I made many people in Ottawa happy when I reported finally on a Friday night late after talking with the Obama team that he had agreed to make his first official visit to Canada. Of course, we skipped that with Donald Trump, but I think for good reason. But clearly, for coming back to Biden, in his first 100 days, he has to focus on the pandemic, and he will want to listen to scientific advice, but also he will be concerned about taking care of business and Americans that are affected. And I think on that, probably it will be less difficult to get agreement with Congress on a package that could be quickly delivered. And on the international scene, we have discussed that he will want also to be active and try to rebuild the reputation of the U.S. If we look just more to his agenda, I think that he will want to go to Congress with very ambitious plans related to, as he had outlined in his campaign, on the economy, on climate change. Of course, obviously, it will be very difficult to get that through, and so I expect that we will see a bit of gridlock that will continue. And let's not forget that you will have to deal with the left wing of the Democratic Party also that will want to have rapid movement, and that may be adding a lot of pressure.
Terrific. Thank you. And Jonathan, what does it look like if Trump is reelected, and what's your advice to our Prime Minister?
Well, look, the answer is to some extent the same regardless of the winner, namely an early phone call of congratulations, of a commitment to work together. And with President Trump, there is a relationship. I suppose, judging from media reports, it's been up and down from time to time. But they do understand each other, and they do understand where there is common cause. And it comes back to very earlier in our conversation. I think one emphasizes those areas where one can work together. So, we've had a wonderfully effective working relationship on the ground at the border, even with the border closure for tourism, in allowing essential business to be conducted, and that's going well. So CBSA and Homeland Security are in touch hourly, if not daily, to make sure things work well. After some hiccups, we've reached some accommodation using 3M as an example regarding production of masks and personal protective equipment and having those shared. As we get closer to a vaccine, the cooperation in areas like pharma become an early priority as well. And look, we share an interest, of course, given the impact on employment and growth, in finding a path towards economic recovery and recovery of jobs. We've had a little more emphasis on ensuring health first, and thus Trump has not objected to the fact that the decision has been taken and has been reached mutually that the border needs to remain closed for a while. We'll see what the numbers look like going into the winter. So it seems to me that with President Trump returning, one simply builds on those areas where we are already cooperating. And it harks back to what was said earlier about actually sharing some common cause on China and other international security issues as well.
Well, thank you. I'm not sure which one of you received the harder question there, but terrific insights. Yolanda, let me bring you back into the conversation. I know you have a window on some of the questions that may be coming through.
I sure do. Thanks so much, Georgina. It's been great to hear all three of you. Lots of challenges ahead, regardless of what the endless result will be. Maybe I could start off by a first question. International organizations in the past, under the Trump administration, have certainly been getting a lot of comments, negative comments, and to certain people under attack. I just wondered if you thought, and you touched on it a little bit, I think both of you did, with reference to the WTO, but if we look at the United Nations, or even with respect to his announcement to pull out funding of the WHO, do you expect under Biden and eventual Biden administration, obviously, for that to change? How will he signal that early on? And will he really have the opportunity to do so, given that he will be, as you both said, obliged to prioritize his domestic issues?
Well, maybe I'll go first. As I tried to suggest earlier, some of the concerns that Lighthizer and Trump have chosen to express in one way are actually shared more broadly by the United States and by others. We ourselves in Canada acknowledge that WTO rules need to be expanded and updated for the 21st century. They do not adequately cover the kinds of issues we talked about vis-a-vis China on industrial subsidies, on intellectual property. So we share an interest in trying to make these organizations stay relevant and effective and current. Similarly, Canada joined many others at the WHO in promoting, and what has been adopted, a comprehensive review of how the WHO is functioning and how it can be improved. We don't think the best way to do that is to withdraw in the meantime, but rather to work with like-minded to make that organization better. And of course, the UN reform is an ongoing agenda. There are more prospects of having more meaningful conversation with the Biden administration than with the Trump administration in that regard, but actually an agenda of keeping these organizations relevant and making reforms and improvements where we can.
I would agree with that. I think that Biden will be a lot more collaborative and will not want to dictate the terms as Trump was doing so. And I think he understands that if you are serious about resolving big global issues like climate change and pandemics and other health issues, you have to work together, and it's better to work from the inside. From my perspective, the leadership of the WHO has been lacking. They were complacent and should have pushed China a lot more. So my expectation is that with Biden, we will see United States a lot more active on the international scene, working with partners and with those organizations.
Thank you. I have a question here on the border. And I'm no doubt you both agree, we may be under some pressure by a new administration to reopen the border in spite of the fact that there are still ongoing risks with the pandemic and obviously the government's concern with respecting the health and safety of Canadians. How does the Canadian government effectively manage those competing priorities moving forward?
Well, maybe if I can start on this, I would say...
I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I think it's been very effectively managed. I think there's been...
I think, Jonathan, you might be freezing a little bit, so maybe I just might ask Guy to answer.
From the administration.
Okay, well... Okay, so I would say on this that of course, if it's a Biden administration, it will be somewhat easier in as much as he will follow scientific advice. And I think the scientific advice clearly at this stage is that the pandemic is worsening in the US. It's not the time to reopen the border. And I think everyone will agree to delay. If Trump, on the other hand, is back and wants to reopen, then I think the attitude should be, well, look, it's partly reopened in as much as trade is concerned. That's the important part, and let's not jump the gun. And I would say that it would be, I would expect the federal government to resist, because otherwise, then we would compromise too much the health situation in Canada.
So I already see, I'm looking at the clock, we're running out of time. I might ask a question, and Georgina, if you have maybe a follow-up or so that you want to throw in after, before we close the session. In terms of international relationships, the United States has always been obviously an important partner for Canada, and that will continue to be the case. But given the social context and the political turbulence and so forth, I think there's going to be an even more aggressive need to build other relationships. What other relationships with which countries should we be focusing on at this time in terms of strengthening internationally with different countries?
Well, I'll start. Look, we have a solid foundation across both East and West, building on CETA and shared values. The Canada-Europe relationship is strong. You will have seen the Prime Minister having engaged with the head of the Commission and the European Council most recently on that front. Europe is filling some of the vacuum on climate and other related issues. Similarly, across the Pacific, building on CPTPP, an increased concern with maritime security as well. Canada's engagement with Asia is vibrant and growing. And I say Asia, beyond China, beyond Japan. Minister Ng is in the middle of leading a virtual women's trade mission to Korea. As we speak, we've proposed free trade negotiations with the countries of ASEAN. So I think we stay the course in terms of our engagement. The Americas are going through a tough time, whether Mexico or Brazil in light of COVID, Argentina in light of the economy, but we are a country of the Americas as well, with a special relationship with the Caribbean. They're of less economic consequence than Asia and Europe, but important to our well-being as well, and that would continue. So my message or assessment is Canada simply builds from its current base of strength in those relationships.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I would agree.
Do you want to add something before we?
Yes, I agree with John, but this being said, I think that we have to invest a lot more in our international relations, because there has been an erosion in the last few years, which may explain why we lost our 2 last bids to be elected on the UN Security Council. And I think, Canada is, we like to join clubs and organizations, but we have to go a step beyond that to make a better use. And for instance, the G20 is a forum where we could maybe look at to resolve some big issues that are difficult to resolve elsewhere. If I may put on my former hat of chief negotiator and climate ambassador for Canada, I have become convinced that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change will never produce a good agreement on climate change. On the other hand, at the G20, here you have countries that emit 80% of greenhouse gases emission. Why don't we start there with a good agreement that would put a tax on carbon? We may even look at the content carbon in imports, because that would also send a very powerful signal. It will help our exports of aluminum because, of course, it's produced with hydro. And so I think we have to recover some of the creativity that we used to have in the Foreign Service, but that maybe has not received enough attention in the last few years.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're already out of time for more questions. And again, I think your perspective and insight, I'm sure governments and our participants are listening in terms of the strategies, regardless of what the endless result of the election will be, would be very helpful as we move forward and the impact of this election. So allow me to take these last few minutes to first thank the 3 of you, to Jonathan Freed, Guy Saint-Jacques, and Georgina Black for that wonderful discussion. I'll take a second as well to thank, of course, our lead partners, CIBC, as well as Microsoft, our supporting partners, Business Development Bank of Canada, Bell, Canadian Bankers Association, the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada, Canada Pension Plan Investments, Deloitte, National Public Relations, and the Globe and Mail. So our next session is next Monday, November 9th from 2 to 3 with the president of Suncor, Mark Little. Don't miss it. And I'll remind you to continue to check the Feed Loop or PPF website for all the latest on the summit. And we will be able to keep you updated then. So thank you so much. See you next Monday at 2 o'clock. Hopefully there'll be a result by then. Bye-bye.